On Sunday, we ended with two verses, if you'll recall. Two verses of prophecy about the coming Messiah. The instant cleansing of the leper. Remember the instant cleansing of the leper who was in end stage leprosy because it said the leprosy was all over him. It would have caught everyone's attention when he came into Jerusalem, when he came to the temple to offer his sacrifice to the priest, to let the priest determine, according to Leviticus 14, whether he was cured of leprosy or not, and with the two birds and the cedar and the hyssop, etc. There would have been this stir. This is how we ended on Sunday, with someone saying in Jerusalem, there was a man who came to the temple claiming that someone cured him of leprosy. And the Jews would have had to ask the question, who is this person? Clearly this man either had leprosy and is now completely cured, or the man is a liar. But I think he would have taken witnesses with him to the temple. And so the stir that Jesus caused in Jerusalem is, who is this man that's walking around healing people of leprosy? Because only God can heal leprosy. And we ended with these two verses because remember, there's Lonnie crossing. Come on in, Lonnie. Remember, everyone had the opportunity. Everyone in Israel had the same opportunity to make a decision, who is Jesus of Nazareth? And I ended, and I just want to share this again. The questions that should have been going through Israel's head, as Israel has always been waiting for a Messiah. The Messiah was prophesied in every Old Testament book. They've always been waiting on a deliverer, a Messiah, a conquering king, and for the more astute, even a suffering servant. So they should have asked the question, when someone shows up, and the very first miracle he does is heal someone of leprosy, they should have been questioning, could this be the one? And I want to give you these verses again because there were some people in Israel, not most of them were against Jesus, but there were some. There were some that understood who he was. There were some that fell at his feet. There were some that asked him to do things that no mortal human could ever do, like cure leprosy, like give me my sight back. Blind Bartimaeus asked Jesus. He asked him, what do you want, Bartimaeus? As he calls out, Son of David, have mercy on me. He asked Bartimaeus, what is it that you want? And Bartimaeus said, I want my sight back. I wouldn't go to any of you and ask you if I was blind to give me my sight back. And you wouldn't come to me if you were blind and say, Rick, give me my sight back. There were people in Israel, there were Jews that recognized that Jesus was the promised Messiah. They went to verses like this in Deuteronomy 18. See, I changed the number. Chapter 18, verse 15, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like from among you, or like me from among you. So the Lord is going to raise up a prophet. Remember, Jesus asked several times, who do the people say that I am? And they said, some say you're the prophet. The Samaritan woman said, I know that a prophet is coming. And then she goes back to her town and says, could this be the prophet? They knew this verse. They knew this. And it's so sad to me that Jesus is walking around on the earth. And some said, this man is doing the things that only God could do. God said that he would send a man one day. He would put his words in the mouth of this prophet, and that this prophet would speak all that God commanded him. Could this be him? Could this one Jesus who's cured this leper, could he be the promised prophet? You go to Isaiah 7:14 was the other verse we left with. Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. The Jews knew this. They knew this. I mean, talk about the most incredible event on earth ever. It's that a woman could get pregnant and bear a son without a man being involved. The Jews knew this prophecy because this was miracle beyond miracle. That human life could just spontaneously grow in a woman's fetus. It had never been heard of before. They didn't understand how God the Holy Spirit would make her pregnant. We still don't understand how he did that. But the fact is, they knew this prophecy, that one day a virgin will be with child and bear a son, and she will call his name Emmanuel. Emmanuel means God with us. And if only God can cure leprosy, here I'm tying the bow now, if only God can cure leprosy, and God told us in the Old Testament that one day God would come to earth and be born of a virgin, God with us would be His name, could this Jesus, the one who healed the leper, could He be the Son of the Virgin? But nobody asked the questions. The Pharisees, the leaders of Israel, should have gone into Jesus of Nazareth's background. They should have gone to Nazareth. They should have found the witnesses, the Jewish witnesses. They could have remembered the story that Mary told, this crazy virgin who 30 years ago told a story of being talked to by an angel named Gabriel who came. They could have found out the story. Mary was alive. They could have asked Joseph about this. But they didn't. They simply condemned Jesus as a liar and one sent by Satan. It's just so sad. But I want you to see the other side of the story. There are some people in Israel. There's a precious few. But there are some people in Israel in Jesus' day that recognized Him for who He was, and they bowed in humility in worship of the Son of God. The age-old question that every human being has to answer for themselves is, who is Jesus? Who is He? And what will I do with Him? Next time we meet, it's going to be next Wednesday because Sunday I go to Carriage Inn. But next Wednesday I'm going to go... I talk a lot about the fact that Jesus asked a lot of questions in the Bible. In Jesus' ministry, if you count up the questions He asked, somebody take a guess at how many He asked. In a 3.5-year ministry, 3.5 years, only the recorded things. Because John says, if everything that He taught was written down, I suppose not even the world could hold the books. 339. 339 recorded questions that Jesus asked people. What was the most important one He ever asked anyone? He asked Peter one day in John chapter 11, who do you say that I am? And Jesus asks every one of us, individually, every human being, the same question. That's the question that must be answered. Who do you say that I am? And every human being has an equal privilege, an equal opportunity to answer that question. Who is Jesus? And some of these people that we're seeing tonight, we're going to see another event involving a woman. If you would move to Luke chapter 8 with me. Luke chapter 8. Another woman who Jesus ministered to. She was a hemorrhaging woman. Hemorrhage means to bleed. She was bleeding. Bleeding in the way a woman bleeds. I'll say it that way. She didn't have a cut. She was bleeding in the natural way a woman bleeds. It just didn't stop. And it went on in her life for 12 years. And so what we'll see here again is Jesus making ceremonially unclean people clean. I'll show you from the book of Leviticus in just a minute. A woman that is bleeding, for the duration of her bleeding, is unclean. She is ceremonially unclean, unable to bring her sacrifice to the temple. This woman, as we'll see, has been bleeding for 12 years. She's been worshiped from a worship standpoint. She's been cast out from Jewish worship for over a decade. She wants back in. She desperately wants back in. This is a Jew that knows proper worship with God. This Jewish woman wants to be clean so that she can worship God properly. That's why she takes the risks that she's about to take. It was risky to do what she did. So we see here again, an unclean person comes into the presence of Jesus, and instead of Him becoming unclean from touching her, He makes her clean. He cleanses her because Jesus, as God, is the source of cleansing. Jesus gets to determine what's clean and unclean. Jesus can't be made unclean. He determines cleanliness in the universe. He's the source of cleanness. He's the source of determining whether someone is properly related to God and can come to God and worship God properly and personally. Jesus, God decides that. Jesus as God. One more thing before we get into the story. Remember that being clean or being unclean determines the level at which you can worship God. If you are unclean, you can pray to God outside in your cast out place outside the city in your tent. You can certainly pray to God. What you cannot do is worship the way all the other Jews worship. You can't keep the Mosaic law. You can't worship on the Sabbath, on the Day of Atonement. You can't bring your sacrifices. You're unclean. You can't sacrifice your lamb on Passover because you can't bring your lamb to the priest because you're unclean and you can't approach the temple. So for 12 years, this woman has been an outcast from the Jewish religious system, the public Jewish religious system. Look at what it says in Luke chapter 8, verse 40. A quick map. Jesus is up in the Galilee area, the Sea of Galilee up in the north. It says, as Jesus returned, so he was on the other side of the sea, and he went back to the western side, Capernaum, what is her name? Magdala, all the western side of the Sea of Galilee. He's come back there. That's where he's at in this story. As Jesus returned, it says the people welcomed him, for they had all been waiting for him. And that's very interesting. Just that people were welcoming God. It's the Greek word apodekomai. Apodekomai, and it means to welcome or to willingly permit access to one's company. They allowed Jesus to enter into their space. They welcomed him. The Pharisees, the scribes, the Sadducees, the lawyers, there was never any welcome for Jesus. But Jesus was popular in this area. This word doesn't mean that they all worshiped him. It doesn't mean that they all believed. What it means is that at least at this time in Jesus' ministry, he's been doing enough healings and working enough miracles that his popularity was very high, and they wanted him to come back. They'd been waiting for him to come back, and here he is, he's back. In verse 41 it says, there came a man named Jairus. Jairus is his name. There is no J in the Hebrew. Jairus would have been the pronunciation of his name with a Y, not a J. But here comes this man. Now this isn't the story we're going to look at, but we have to get past a couple of facts. And then we see the hemorrhaging woman. Jairus, we'll call him Jairus just for sake of English. There came a man named Jairus. He was an official of the synagogue. Jairus was the top dog in the synagogue. Jairus was in charge of maintaining order, of scheduling the event, who was going to read what scrolls, all of those things. That was Jairus' job as an official. What I'm trying to tell you is he was a spiritual leader in Israel. Not everybody rejected Jesus. Jairus, this spiritual leader, this official in the synagogue of his town, knew who Jesus was. There came a man named Jairus, and he was an official of the synagogue. And he fell at Jesus' feet. You see that a lot in the worship of Jesus. All these people, we saw it with the leper, we saw it with the woman earlier who Jesus healed. We see this people falling at Jesus' feet. Worship. They understood who he is. They understood he's a miracle man sent from God. He fell at Jesus' feet and he began to implore him or beg him to come to his house. Again, a spiritual leader who believed that Jesus was Messiah in the flesh. The Son of God in the flesh is who Jairus thought Jesus was, because he's about to ask him for a miracle. You don't just go up to anybody and ask him for a miracle. What does he want? What does Jairus come and beg Jesus Christ for? It says in verse 42, for he, Jairus, had an only daughter. Luke is the only writer of this event that adds that word only. The way it's set up in the Greek, that not only an only daughter, an only child. He's got one child, and it's his little girl. He had an only daughter about 12 years old, and she was dying. The way that's set up, where she's in the end stages of dying, she will most certainly die if Jesus doesn't intervene, the girl will die. It doesn't look like she's going to die. She is in the process of dying. As we'll see by the end of the story, we won't make it there tonight probably, but she does die. So she is very, very ill. We don't know what she has. It doesn't matter. The fact is, Dr. Jesus can fix anything, right? Doesn't matter what it is. And Jairus knows that. A desperate situation in which this young Jewish girl is about to enter adulthood. And it's at this time that she's being taken from the world. Let me tell you two things. You've heard the word bar mitzvah, right? Bar mitzvah. Bar is the Hebrew word for son. And a mitzvah is a law. The mitzvah is the law. It's the Mosaic law. When a 13-year-old son has his bar mitzvah, what that means is that he becomes a son of the law. He becomes a son of the Mosaic law. That means that his father obviously still has authority over him, but the book has authority. The 13-year-old boy is responsible now for keeping the law himself. Everything in the law that pertains to any man, that 13-year-old boy is responsible for now. All the blessings of the law and all the cursings of the law are on that adult son. That 13-year-old boy becomes a son of the law of Moses. That's what bar mitzvah means. Now let me ask you, have you ever heard of a bat mitzvah? B-A-T. Not B-A-R, B-A-T. B-A-T is the Hebrew word for daughter. Jews have bat mitzvahs. They're just not as popular, but they're everywhere. And that happens to a Jewish girl at age 12. At age 12, a Jewish girl becomes a daughter of the law. With all the same things that I just said about the bar mitzvah, the son of the law, the girl matures 1 year quicker according to Jewish rabbis. Interesting, huh? Bat mitzvah, age 12. How old is this little girl? She's 12. She has become a Jewish adult. Her whole life is ahead of her. And it's at this time that God says, I'm taking her home with me. And that's the desperation of the situation here. The girl has her whole life ahead of her, and she is dying, most definitely dying, as her adult life of privilege is just beginning. It's a heartbreaking story. And Jairus comes and not just asks Jesus, but he implores him. He's begging at the feet of Jesus, the Son of God, to heal his daughter, to save her from dying. Because it's a desperate situation. And so what does it say there? It says, for he had an only daughter about 12 years old and she was dying. It doesn't say what Jesus' decision is, but it actually does, because look at the next phrase. But as he went, the crowds were pressing against him. Jesus has made the decision, I'm going to take care of the little girl. I'm going to go to Jairus' house and I'm going to heal her. Because it says Jesus was going. Jairus begs him, come to my house, and as Jesus went. We know by the end of the story that where he was going was he was moving. He'd made his decision. Jairus, understand, let's go. And Jesus is on the move toward Jairus' house. So we have this understanding that he was going to do a miracle. He was going to save this little girl's life. But look what happened along the way. Something happens along the way. It says that the crowds were pressing against him. I want to show you here that Jesus was never too busy to go out of his way to help. He, on his way to do one spectacular thing that only he could do, he met the needs of someone along the way. An intriguing story. Jesus had decided, I'm going to miraculously heal Jairus' daughter, but on the way, there was another need of Jesus, and he filled that along the way. There's no asking too much of Jesus Christ. There's no inconveniencing Jesus Christ. There's no, listen, I can't do anything right now, one thing at a time. I'm going to help Jairus' daughter, and that's all I can do right. There is none of that in Jesus' world. Let me just say this, that the Bible has much to say about us being imitators of Jesus Christ. Never inconvenienced. When a need was asked of Jesus, even when He's on the way to fulfill another need, it's just filling needs. He's filling needs everywhere He goes. I want you to see that. I hope you've already have. Verse 43. This is what happens on Jesus' way to heal Jairus' daughter. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone comes up to Jesus. Now, an interesting point, two interesting points. That the entire lifetime of the little girl who Jesus is going to heal, for that little girl's entire 12-year lifespan, this woman has been bleeding uncontrollably. I don't know if there's any significance to that, but it's an interesting thought. It's an interesting fact. And the other interesting fact is that Dr. Luke has to write, Dr. Luke, let's remember what Luke is. He's a doctor. And Dr. Luke has to write here that the girl could not be healed by anyone. Well, that's a little jab that Luke had to write down. The medical establishment of the day couldn't fix her. No Jewish doctor could make her bleeding stop. As a matter of fact, Mark says something additional to this. Look at what it says in the book of Mark when he writes of this same event. Concerning this woman and doctors, Mark in Mark 5 verse 25 says, a woman who had had a hemorrhage for 12 years, obviously the same woman, and had endured much at the hand of many physicians, and had spent all that she had, she's broke. All her money in the last 12 years has been paying doctor bills to try to fix her, try to stop her bleeding that has made her unclean and unable to properly worship the God that she loved. She had spent all that she had and was not helped at all, but rather had grown worse. So the doctors not only couldn't heal the woman of her hemorrhaging, of her uncontrolled bleeding, they had made her situation worse, according to what Mark says. Luke doesn't add those things. Why Luke doesn't add those things? Maybe they're just unimportant to the question. Some say maybe Luke was protecting his profession. I don't believe Dr. Luke would have been. It was just it didn't move Luke's process along, his story, so he left this fact out. But clearly, the clear fact is that the medical people in Israel could not heal this woman. She was broke. She'd spent all she had trying to get healed, and she was desperate now. She was desperate to regain her ceremonial cleanness so she could worship properly. And this is what she did in desperation. Verse 44 says, well, let's read verse 43. A woman who had a hemorrhage for 12 years and could not be healed by anyone came up behind Jesus. Now remember, she is unclean. And she risks everything to push through the crowd to get to Jesus Christ. Only she knows that she's unclean. But she comes up behind Jesus and she touched the fringe of His cloak. His robe that He was wearing, the Jewish robes had tassels on the four corners of it. This is the fringe that she would have touched on His robe. The very bottom tassels on His robe is what she touched. She touched the fringe of His cloak, and immediately, her hemorrhage stopped. Now, Matthew adds another interesting fact to this. Matthew and Mark also wrote about this, just like Luke did. Matthew tells us what this woman was thinking. Why would she go up to Jesus? Remember what Jairus just did. For a contrast, I tell you, the more you read the Bible, the more you see all these contrasts. In contrast, Jairus comes up to Jesus Christ. He falls on his feet before Jesus Christ. He begs Jesus Christ directly, face to face, please, my daughter is ill. She's my only daughter. Please come to my house and heal my daughter. Here's a woman who does none of that. She does not want herself to be known, but she knows something about Jesus. So she risks everything to get close enough to Him to merely touch the cloak of His garment. Look at what it says in Matthew chapter 9. Luke doesn't add this fact. A woman who had been suffering from a hemorrhage for 12 years came up behind Jesus and touched the fringe of His cloak. Why? Why that? Why didn't she stop Jesus and beg Him to heal her the way so many others had? Because she was saying to herself, Matthew adds, these are her inner thoughts. Her thought was, if I only touch His garment, I will get well. Now, this is not a medical treatment, touching the garment of a man from Nazareth. This is more what you would call superstition. Wouldn't you? That's superstitious to think this man can do miracles and I just touch his garment, I'll get well. So her knowledge was imperfect. I just follow this train of thought. Look and see how gracious Jesus is. Her knowledge is imperfect. Touching the cloak of Jesus shouldn't fix anything. Asking God directly in prayer for things, that is the way we get things. Her knowledge is imperfect. She reasons to herself, if I just touch the Son of God's cloak, I'll be healed. She didn't think 100% correctly about how Jesus did things. But what does God say? Does God say, nope, you're not doing the process right, I'm not going to heal you? What does God say to the Christian, to the believing woman here who wants to worship God, who wants to be healed of her bleeding? What is God's response to her? You know enough. You know enough for me to give you grace today. I'm going to heal you. I bet after this healing, this woman became a giant in her circle. I bet she went back and picked up all the information, the knowledge. I bet she turned in with these disciples. I don't know that. This is my speculation. But risking everything like she did to make Jesus unclean, to make the crowd unclean, we'll talk about it in a minute. This was a heroic thing she did, coming up to Jesus in this crowd. Personally heroic. But she doesn't know the proper way to do things. What she does have is faith that that man is God. And if I get close enough to that man, and if I merely touch his garment, the power of God can heal me where no human being can heal me. That's what she went to do. She believed. She believed that Jesus was the Messiah. She believed that He alone could heal her and make her clean and give her the ability to worship in the temple properly again. She believed that Jesus was the solution to her problems. So Jesus treated her in grace. He honored her faith in Him. She honored the fact in what she believed about Him was accurate. The process that she went through was not right. But Jesus accepted it. She'll learn tomorrow. Today she has a need that I'm going to heal. I want to go to Leviticus just for a second, show you a couple of slides and ask this question. I tell you she's risking a lot here. This is the question. Is there any problem with what this woman is doing in this crowd of people? Look at what it says in Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25, concerning a woman discharging blood. This woman has been bleeding for 12 years. In Leviticus chapter 15, verse 25, God says to Moses, "Now if a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity," so we're not talking about her monthly menstrual cycle, we're talking about bleeding in addition. Did you know this stuff was in the Bible? Some of you want to curl up a little bit, maybe not the easiest thing to read, but it's in the Bible. Fearfully and wonderfully made our bodies are. If a woman has a discharge of her blood many days, not at the period of her menstrual impurity, or if she has a discharge beyond that period, like this 12-year woman, all of the days of her impure discharge, she shall continue as though in her menstrual impurity. She is unclean. She can't worship. Did you know that about a Jewish woman during her menstrual cycle in the month? She was unclean for those days. She couldn't worship in the temple. Look what it says right after this in the next two verses, Leviticus 15:26. What about her uncleanness? Can she transfer her uncleanness to anything else? And the answer is yes. It says, any bed on which she lies all the days of her discharge shall be to her like her bed at menstruation. Unclean. The woman lying in a bed makes the bed unclean. And everything on which she sits shall be unclean. If she sits on a chair, unclean. She sits on a tree stump, unclean. Anything she touches becomes unclean. It shall be unclean like her uncleanness at that time. Likewise, whoever touches them shall be unclean, and shall wash his clothes and bathe in water and be unclean until evening. So according to the book of Leviticus, you couldn't touch a woman that was bleeding. You would become unclean. Couldn't properly worship God that day. Evening starts the next day. The bulk of the day that you were in, you would remain unclean. This woman is in a crowd that's so heavy that when Jesus asks a question, look at what it says in verse 54 or 45. Let me read it to you if you got out of it in Luke chapter 8, verse 45. And Jesus says, after the woman touches his cloak, "Who is the one who touched me?" Jesus wants to know. He didn't feel the touch. Just like if I was wearing something baggy and you touched the cloth of my clothing, unless you tugged on it and let me know you did it, I wouldn't know you did it. Jesus says, "I don't know who touched me." That's not a problem because Jesus was a man. He's omniscient as God, knows everything as God, but as a man he learned things. And as a man on this day, according to the Scriptures, he didn't know who touched him. The Bible says he felt the power go out of him. It didn't weaken him. He simply felt that God had done a miracle through him. So the woman, here's the point. The woman, the hemorrhaging woman, was making everyone in the crowd unclean. Everybody. Because they were packed in like sardines. Peter answers Jesus' question, this question, "Who's the one who touched me?" And while they were all denying it, like saying, "Well, it wasn't me, I didn't touch you. It wasn't me, I didn't touch you," Peter chimes in and he says, "Master, the people are crowding and pressing in on you." How are we, the question Jesus is asking is, or the statement that he's making is, we're being pressed in here so tight, we're like grapes being crushed for wine. This word for pressing in is only used one time in the New Testament. It's used right here by Peter. If you go outside of the New Testament, this word is used for crushing grapes to make wine. Peter says we are so jammed into this crowd that how in the world could you ask, "Master, who's touching you?" Like everybody's touching everybody. We're crammed in here. So, if the cramming of people is so tight, everyone who touched this woman becomes unclean. Now that unclean person touches someone else, what do they become? unclean. So this entire crowd is now unclean because the risk this woman is taking to get to Jesus to be healed. Amazing faith this woman had. Verse 46, as Peter says, we're being pressed like grapes. We're being crushed like grapes. How could we know, Master? How could we possibly know who touched you? Jesus says, someone did touch me, for I was aware that power had gone out from me. So evidently Jesus, and this is tricky, and I'm saying this carefully, evidently God, and now I'm talking possibly God the Father, God the Holy Spirit, healed this woman without Jesus being aware of it. I can't prove that, but Jesus doesn't know it. Jesus isn't asking rhetorical questions here. Jesus wants the woman to come forth. Jesus knows there's a person of faith in the crowd that has touched him and been healed. He felt that power go out of him. She touched him, and he knew it. And I don't want to try to explain that further. Maybe I went too far already. When you talk about the God-man, Jesus Christ, buddy, you're on thin ice going outside of what the Scripture says. But what Jesus says is, I know that power went out from me, and I want whoever touched me to come forth. I want their faith to be made public. In verse 47, when the woman saw that she had not escaped notice. I mean, just imagine this. The woman goes up. She must have been on her hands and knees to get to his cloak, the bottom, the fringes of his clothing. She tries to get out of there as quickly as she can, but she didn't make it. She was caught in her escape. So when the woman saw that she had not escaped notice, she came trembling. Now, why was she trembling? Was she scared? Was she fearful? Was she embarrassed that her bleeding was about to be made public? Was she embarrassed about the fact that I am unclean and I just ruined the whole crowd? Sorry. So there's a list of things that she could have been trembling about. But when she came to Jesus, it said she came trembling and she fell down before Him. Worship. She knows who He is. She just risked everything. This woman that has no money, has seen the best of the best doctors in Israel, can't be healed. She's risked everything. She's risked reputation. I mean, what if Jesus didn't clean her or heal her? She's going to be very, very unpopular now. She risked a lot going up to Jesus. But she falls down before Him in worship, and she declared in the presence of all the people. She's made known, she's made public what went on with her. She declared in the presence of all the people the reason why she had touched Him. What's the reason? Because I knew if I could only touch the cloak of His garment, that He could heal me, that I could be healed. So she tells the gathering her story and how she had been immediately healed by Jesus. And what does Jesus say to her? He didn't correct her. He didn't change her theology. He didn't tell her that touching my cloak is wrong. If you want to be healed, get in line, get at my feet, beg before me like Jairus did. He simply treated her in grace. He gave her the benefit of the doubt. He knew what she believed, so He healed her. He said to her, daughter, term of endearment here, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. So faith again, faith. Your faith has made you well. We close with this slide right here. Faith in what? Jesus says, daughter, your faith has made you well. Your faith is the reason you were healed. It's not the faith in Jesus that healed her. The faith was the reason that that she was healed through Jesus Christ. Faith in what? Your faith in me, Jesus would say, as the Jewish Messiah. If I weren't indeed the Messiah, if I weren't God in the flesh, you would never have thought that touching even just my outer garment, you would have never believed that that could have healed you. But you did believe that that could heal you because you believe that I am the Jewish Messiah. This is the faith that healed this woman this day. Your faith that I alone could heal you. After spending all your money on all the doctors, you came to me because you knew that I was the solution, that I could, in fact, heal you. Your faith that I alone could make you ceremonially clean. Again, this was something that the priest had to do. There was a ceremony, there was a sacrifice, there were offerings that needed to be brought, but this woman was healed instantly and cleansed by Jesus Christ instantly. So your faith in me that I alone could make you ceremonially clean, and your faith that I alone could bring you back into a proper worship relationship with God. This is the faith that the woman showed this day. This is the faith that Jesus is speaking of. You see that in the story of what she risked and what her faith had to be for Jesus to do what she did. She had to think He was Messiah for her to think in her head, if I just touch His garment, I'll be healed. She had to think that He could heal her, or she wouldn't have taken the risk of infecting the whole crowd. She had to think that she could become clean, and she had to think that she could again worship properly at the temple by getting even close to this man, Jesus of Nazareth. And that's the reason Jesus says here, your faith has made you well, go in peace. That's the reason that Jesus healed her and asked her to come forward for all Israel to know of that woman's faith in Jesus Christ. He could have kept walking. Jesus chose to stop. Jesus chose to make this event public in Israel. He could have kept walking. She was still healed. He wanted her to come forward and publicly declare her faith in Him as Messiah that day in that village. And she did it. She believed in who Jesus was. She believed that He was Messiah. She believed that He was God on earth. She believed in Him as the Son of God who could heal her and allow her proper worship of her God to continue after a 12-year break. What a great day for this great woman. What a great day to be able to go back to the temple that evening. Go back to the temple in the morning. Go back to her family that she apparently had to leave because she'd make them all unclean also. A lot going on in the story. Next time we're going to pick up the story and see what happened with Jairus' daughter, because we haven't finished it. Remember, Jesus was on His way to heal Jairus' daughter when He was interrupted by the hemorrhaging woman. We'll pick up the story next week. Father,